Hey guys, SuperHorrorBro Mike here, and in today's Bendy and the Ink Machine video, it's finally time to make some predictions as to what exactly will happen in Bendy Chapter 5, as well as theorizing on how exactly Henry's story will end as we move into the final chapter of the game, fittingly titled The Last Reel. There are many questions left unanswered as to what exactly is going on at Joey Drew Studios, as well as how exactly Chapter 5 will play out. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in to 10 Bendy and the Ink Machine Chapter 5 predictions. Joey Drew is a mysterious character we don't know all that much about, which is strange considering he is likely responsible not only for Henry's reappearance at the studio after being absent for 30 years, but also the architect behind the bizarre ritual and shady goings-on at the studio. All we really know about Joey Drew is that he filled his employees' minds with propaganda about dreaming big and believing in oneself.
There's nothing wrong with dreaming. Wishing for the impossible is just human nature. That's how I got started. Just a fizzle and a dream.
When in reality, he was simply doing this to achieve his own secretive goals.
Okay, let's stop right there. I can only do so many takes of this trash a day. And tell the guys in writing I want more use of the word dreaming in every message. Keep railing on that, okay?
But what was Joey's end game? What was he trying to achieve? Well, this is a question I am certain will be answered by the game's creator immediately in Bendy Chapter 5. I myself have theorized that Joey's plan may be to turn his workforce into cartoon creations to implement within his next big project, Bendyland, the world's first theme park to feature living cartoon mascots, or be using the ink to reanimate the dead as a kind of fountain of eternal youth concept, a way to ensure he could live forever, albeit in an inky body. However, these are simple theories, and only the creators of the game know for sure the reasons why Joey has been doing what he's been doing. Expect them to share this with us in Chapter 5, and expect Chapter 5 to be very much about Joey, with multiple audio logs from the man himself filling in those pesky plot holes. Much in the same way we had multiple audio logs and cutscenes from Susie Campbell in Bendy Chapter 3. Continuing with the theme of new information key to the overarching story of Bendy, we should also expect to finally have the Ink Machine explained to us. Whether that be by Joey Drew himself, or by the good version of Alice who rescued Henry from the demented Susie Campbell at the end of Chapter 4. This new version of Alice is likely Alison Pendle, Alice Angel's replacement voice actress at the studio, who stepped in place of Susie Campbell. And seeing as she is a version of Alice herself, and so likely went through the ritual process, it is logical to conclude she gives up some new information to Henry in Chapter 5. Explaining how exactly the Ink Machine works and what exactly has been going on behind the scenes at the studio before Henry's arrival. In turn, this may provide Henry with the information needed to shut down the Ink Machine and reverse the ritual process. I've spoken on how we will see more from Joey Drew in Chapter 5, but in reality, I firmly believe we first encountered Henry's old pal at the end of Chapter 1, and he's been pursuing us ever since. I've already covered this in previous videos. There is a lot of evidence to suggest Bendy is Joey. The wheelchair we see in Chapter 1 likely belonged to Joey, and Bendy has a limp. Joey's character traits were that he came from an artistic background and was very controlling. Bendy has one large hand to symbolize this. Also, we've seen cartoon creations embodying the persona of their human counterparts. Norman Polk was a projectionist who became a walking projector. Susie Campbell became a version of the character she played and, like her human form, wished to achieve perfection. And if Thomas Connor and Wally Franks became BORIS clones, which I believe they did, then they show this through their helpful ways and skills at fixing things up. just look at that arm. All this has been explained in far more detail in previous videos I've made, but the bottom line is, I believe Joey became a literal embodiment of corrupt energy in Demon Bendy due to his real-life personality. It may be if we can reverse the ritual process in Chapter 5 that Bendy turns back into Joey Drew's human form to explain all to Henry, realizing he made a terrible mistake. Why are there so many Boris clones? They literally appear everywhere and with no explanation. My personal theory is that the Boris clones are the handymen from the Gent Maintenance Company, since they would have been the final people Joey would have used the ink machine process on after perfecting its design with other workers such as Sammy, Susie, and the artists at the studio. After all, he would have needed his team of maintenance workers to keep things going around the studio until everything was fine-tuned. I believe this is why we see the Gent workers taking on a form closest to the cartoon characters rather than the inky abominations seen in the Lost Ones. Presumably, these were earlier test subjects. We also have evidence such as finding bones in the handyman boxes, a wrench on the Boris clone in Chapter 1, and all manner of maintenance tools in Boris's safe house in Chapter 3. However, once again, this is just a theory, and for the real answer as to why there are so many Boris clones, we will have to wait for Chapter 5, where I believe this answer will be provided. When looking at the achievement list for Bendy Chapter 5, we see an achievement called To Hell and Back. The picture beside the description, complete the main story, shows an open door which looks strikingly similar to the open exit seen in the chase sequence in Chapter 1. You know, the one Henry didn't quite make. So it seems Henry has to get back to this exit at some point during Chapter 5. My prediction? Chapter 5's new area at the bottom of the studio is perhaps shorter than areas seen in other chapters of the game. However, we will be backtracking through previous stages on our way back to the surface. After all, the achievement is called To Hell and Back. Perhaps Henry has to flee the studio as it tears itself apart after reversing the ritual process. Remember the ambiguous line, "He will set us free"? We see this line everywhere, written on walls around the workshop, as well as spoken by Sammy Lawrence in Chapter 2.
Soon he will hear me. He will set us free.
Sammy seems to believe it is the ink demon itself who will set his soul free, but discovers to his peril that this simply isn't true. Who knew? And so it seems likely Henry, with his mission to stop the ritual and reverse the ink machine process, will be the guy who in fact sets us free. But what does set us free actually mean? Well, if we are to believe the workers of the studio are trapped in these inky bodies, and from what Sammy Lawrence says this is the case, then it is possible that Henry may, by stopping the ritual, find a way to reverse this process and restore these poor souls back to their human form, setting them all free in the process. Or he simply frees their souls and they get to escape the studio in spirit form. Again, a question only Chapter 5 can answer. But about the whole answering questions thing, don't expect answers to everything raised by the game so far. There simply won't be time to get answers to all our burning questions in Chapter 5, especially when we consider how little exposition we've been given across the first 4 chapters of the game. While the big important mysteries will no doubt be resolved, the smaller ones, such as how was Alice using others to make herself perfect, who is Linda, how do the Bendy statues resurrect Henry, where is Wally Franks, and how exactly does Henry eat so much bacon soup? these smaller questions likely won't be answered, and instead left up to fans to theorise on and come to their own conclusions. Much of Henry's story at the studio is ambiguous, and I don't expect this to change in Chapter 5. We'll have answers to things we really need to know, but anything else will probably be left to the imagination. It is my firm belief that the Alice and Boris briefly seen at the end of Chapter 4 will be Henry's backup during certain portions of the final chapter of the game, both helping solve puzzles and also fighting alongside Henry in combat situations. We can see this hinted at in the achievement Gold Bricking, which states, "Let others do the work." We've already seen a Boris clone accompanying Henry and helping him out in Chapter 3. This Boris clone, I believe, may have been Wally Franks, but we can't know for sure. If the other Boris clone is Thomas Connor, he seems to mean business, and with Allison brandishing a sword she's not afraid to use, it makes sense for Henry to use his newfound friends as backup in Bendy Chapter 5. Chapter 5 appears to be the most inky yet, at least going by the latest trailer. It seems as though Henry will be knee-deep in ink. In the trailer we also hear moaning and what sounds like the creaking of a boat. It could be that some of Chapter 5 takes place in especially deep ink. Ink that could have something dangerous living below. The achievement, Shadows and Suffering, even has the description, "Discover what's living below." I predict a new enemy living below the surface of the ink that Henry must try to avoid. We've seen water enemies in horror games before, such as Amnesia: The Dark Descent, Resident Evil 4, and Spooky's Jumpscare Mansion, and it's always terrifying to encounter them. With the evidence at hand and past history of other horror games, it's not a stretch to imagine a water, or should I say ink-based enemy, showing up in Chapter 5. So you may be wondering, is Bendy Chapter 5 the final chapter of the game? I believe it is. However, I don't feel it will mark the end for this franchise or its story. You see, Bendy and the Ink Machine is a pretty big IP now, with toys, clothing lines, and even a spin-off mobile game called Bendy in Nightmare Run. It would be naive to think, with such a dedicated fanbase, that Bendy Chapter 5 will be the last we ever see of a dancing demon. I believe while Chapter 5 will be the end of Henry's story, it will not be the end of the franchise itself. That Chapter 5 achievement, To Hell and Back, has the description, "Complete the main story," hinting that there is more to come. I believe we may see some smaller DLC chapters that perhaps place us in the shoes of a different character, such as Wally Franks, and could act as a prequel to Henry's story, showing exactly what happened to certain characters and expanding the backstory to fill in some of those unanswered questions. Beyond that, I wouldn't be shocked if we also saw a full-blown sequel to the game, although this may be further down the line, as Vermeetly and MacLeod have stated their next project is not Bendy related. However, this doesn't rule out the possibility of a different team making the next installment in the franchise under the supervision of its original creators. And if I had to hedge my bets, I would say this may be Rooster Teeth, the team handling the ports of Bendy and the Ink Machine to console later this year. But that's it for my predictions, guys. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. And that's it for today's video. Please remember to give it a like if you did enjoy watching, and maybe drop a comment too, as well as subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications so you never miss an upload. This channel specializes in variety horror content, including creepypasta readings, horror gaming facts and theories, and general interest pop culture horror videos. So if you're interested in all things spooky, you'll find something to enjoy here at SuperHorrorBro. Thanks for watching, and I will see you on the next video.